Welcome to Aware. We are dedicated to communicating information that inspires your positive growth and change. Are you interested in a peaceful planet? Are you interested in optimal health? Are you living with purpose? Are you enjoying your life? We realize each person can make a difference, and our mission is to empower your awareness. The choices that you make in every moment shape your life, and we encourage you to realize that you have your own answers and to always listen to your own truth. We invite you to stay aware.
Hello and welcome to the Aware Show. I am Lisa Garr, and if you ever want to catch our shows, our podcast has these shows on 24/7, so you can go to wherever you love hearing podcasts and look up the Aware Show and be able to share it with your friends. Because today we're going to be talking about a topic that has a lot of application to probably one of the largest growing segments of our population is what they call the aging, the 60 and over. And this is applicable because that's what we're talking about today, what aging really is. And we're doing a deep dive into this topic because there's so much that we're marketed to about this concept about anti-aging, which is predisposing the fact that aging is not good and that if you are aging, it doesn't look great. So you should take this cream or this vitamin or this technique or whatever to make you and keep you looking younger. So that predisposes the fact that aging is not good. What does that really mean? And what does it really mean to move later into life? There are world record holders who are breaking stereotypes because they're winning world records that are older. There are also people on the other side of that that are very young, that are dying of heart attacks or heart disease. What does it really mean to you? Does the conversation about aging dictate the way that you live your life? We're going to talk about some of these stereotypes and really get to the truth of it all with renowned psychotherapist Connie Zweig. She has spent many years researching aging. She has a brand new book out called The Inner Work of Age, which is a radical re-imaging of age, and it includes the wisdom of many prominent elders who offer guidance on shifting from role to soul. She has written many wonderful books, a contributor to the LA Times, known as the Shadow Expert. She has a wonderful book she's co-written called Meeting the Shadow, Romancing the Shadow, and Meeting the Shadow of Spirituality, which is a novel. Welcome, Connie. Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm happy to be here.
Tell me a little bit, you might know the statistics more than I do about the segment of the population that is, quote, aging or over 60. Is it a large amount of the people that are alive today?
You know, I don't think of it like that. We are all aging from the moment we're born.
Oh.
So to say some people are not aging just makes no sense.
Oh, I love that perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, we're aging through the lifespan, right? Our cells are changing, our body mass is changing, our brains are changing from the moment we're born. And it's not all deterioration. Some of it is development and growth and connections of neurons, for example. So I don't quite frame it that way. I did write The Inner Work of Age for people in their 50s and beyond. And the reason is just what you were describing, the cultural attitude about it.
Yes.
So we kind of live in an environment where ageism is the last acceptable ism. And it's institutionalized in our healthcare, in our social safety net, in our workplace where people are forced to enter retirement, even in our education system. And so the culture, as you said, the media sends these messages about worshiping youth and denying or disliking older people. And it's a
not
tragedy.
Just the media, it's songs forever. There's so many songs written about staying young forever and feeling young forever and when I was young, you know.
I know. I know when I was writing the book, I was remembering a lot of lyrics. I have 72 years of life experience. So I remembered a lot of lyrics from the 60s and 70s while I was writing the book, and I realized how much I used to sing to myself Bob Dylan's Forever Young,
Yeah.
which was a blessing on his son when he was born, and it was a fabulous song. And then I started to kind of think about, is that a blessing? What message is it sending to us if we wish to remain forever young? In a way, we're colluding with the ageism when we long for that. And so the reason that I wrote this book, it's the fourth book in the series about the shadow. Meeting the Shadow of Spirituality is not a novel. So Meeting the Shadow, Romancing the Shadow, Meeting the Shadow of Spirituality all explored what's popularly called the dark side of human nature. But it's not quite right. It's the parts of us that are hidden from view that we find unacceptable and reject in ourselves. And I read some research that internalized ageism, in other words, the way we take in and embody and believe what you and I are talking about, all these negative messages about aging, actually affects the way we experience it. So the unconscious beliefs and images that we carry throughout our whole lives shape how we experience later life because they affect our bodies, for example, cardiac health, our brains, for example, memory, our will to live, even our longevity. And so I realized that what this researcher at Yale University was writing about was the shadow. She was writing about the unconscious fears and beliefs and images about old age and how deeply they're affecting us. Every aspect of us, body, mind, spirit. And that's when I knew I needed to write another book.
Well, thank you for that, because it also is defined. I mean, it's very pervasive in our society, as you said, and it has been through lyrics of songs and through all of the marketing that we see. But look at the transitions that we go through in life. So if you have a child and your child or children, you watch them grow up and age and eventually leave the house.
Mm-hmm.
And that transitional experience of leaving the house or the empty nest or anything that you go through, even seeing the child, graduate from preschool or high school or whatever it is, you see you in relationship to this young person. And there's definitely phases that you go through if you have children as well that show and identify you as getting older. It's so obvious.
Yes. So we're watching younger generations and it reflects on us and how long we've lived. I would think what's really important about that point is, I don't know about you, but I didn't have any positive modeling of elders in my early years. I didn't really have a positive grandparent. And so with that internalized ageism that we're kind of swimming in, I didn't have a relationship to counterbalance that.
Right. There was no way, no model. There was
no model for thriving beyond midlife. Mm-hmm. And so if we're grandparents now, right? I'm going beyond the empty nest. Yes. But if we're grandparents now, one of the most important things we can do is just model that presence for the future generations, for the young ones. Just be that quiet presence, that peaceful presence. Model that we can be active, we can be in service, we can be creative in later life. And that in itself is having a profound impact on the kids.
It is, if you are still able to be in your grandchild's life. there are many that are putting their grandparents into senior citizen homes and home for the aging and so forth. And can we talk about that? How our culture, specifically, I don't know if it's just America, that really does not respect the aging as much as maybe other cultures around the world.
Well, age segregation is more rampant in this culture than it is around the world. Indigenous cultures have an actual rite of passage to become an elder. So you were mentioning transitions. You know, we have all these transitions like a high school graduation with an empty nest or a college graduation. We have a christening or a bar mitzvah or a birthday or even a retirement party. We don't have any rite of passage to become an elder. And I think that's one of the reasons that there's so much age segregation, because we don't have any guidance to learn how to value people's life experience and the knowledge that they gather. I like to think about it as every elder person is like a library. And
Yes.
all of the knowledge and life experience and learning that's been gathered, how can we harvest it now? And so when we segregate people by age in these in living facilities and residences, we miss out on all that.
Mm-hmm.
We really miss out on all that. And some of it has to do with the way the healthcare system is designed. Some of it has to do with families not wanting to be responsible for both kids and parents at the same time financially.
Yes.
So some of it is no financial safety net. There are lots of reasons for it, but you know, during COVID, we could see a lot of the impact of nursing homes more than it became more visible to us. And it was heartbreaking to see.
In what way specifically?
Well, partly because there were so many ageist comments about the people in nursing homes. Let's not prioritize them. They're 80, you know, time for them to go. I mean, I saw that everywhere. And also because the care is so lacking. You know, most of them are understaffed. There's very little knowledge about how to continue to provide emotionally and spiritually for elders. I mean, I was trained as a psychologist. I got no training in that. There's very few geriatricians in the country. There's like 1,000 geriatricians in the whole country. So the field in medicine, even gerontology, it's not an attractive field because it doesn't pay well like the other specialties. And so there are kind of layers of explanation for why this is the case now.
Yes, that really did become exacerbated during COVID, and the tragedy that was happening in these residences with the close quarters and the amount of people that were dying of COVID, it was a very, very difficult time. And I'm not sure even the effects of that afterwards, but a lot of people are choosing not to now put their elder parents and so forth into homes like that because of the close proximity of the clients.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about the idea behind meeting the shadow and what the shadow is in the context of aging.
Okay. So, as I mentioned, the shadow is that part of us. You know, we used to think it was in the mind, but we now know that the mind and the body are woven together. They're functionally identical. So there is shadow material in every part of us. And what do I mean by that? Content that we have not expressed or lived out in some way. So when we're growing up, if anger is forbidden and we want to get love and approval, say, from our dad, then the anger gets buried in the shadow, in the body mind. It gets hidden away. And we learn how not to express it. And our personalities develop around that. They adapt to having no anger. And so it protects us at that time from our father's disapproval. But as we grow up and we want intimate relationship, if we can't express anger, then we have a narrowed range of an emotional experience, or sorrow and grief, or whatever the feeling is, joy, it could be joy. And so what happens is the material that gets buried into the shadow lies dormant. It's like a blind spot in our vision. We can't see it. So we don't have a conscious relationship with it. And then it erupts. Like, let's say the anger erupts as rage out of nowhere. Or the grief erupts as depression and we don't know why. Let's say at midlife we get depressed and we don't know why. It's because that energy was in the shadow and it's now surfacing. So in the context of age, the shadows of age are in relation to what was approved of or acceptable and what was not. So if we get the message like you and I were saying earlier, what's acceptable in our culture is to be independent and to be productive and to be quick. And so let's stay with those three. So what happens when we're no longer independent or productive, or we slow down?
It
then there's
takes
a
a piece
lot.
of your soul.
Well, what happens is those other qualities, which have their own beauty to them, are unacceptable because they've been buried in the shadow. I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be weak. Think of the men who fear becoming dependent, or the women who fear becoming unattractive, as you were mentioning, due to aging.
Yes.
That's the shadow in the context of age. All of those fears and beliefs about what's good and what's not good. Young is good and old is bad. Quick is good and slow is bad.
Yes.
So then those shadowy qualities start to emerge. How do we feel about ourselves? Terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, I interviewed hundreds of people, and so many people are feeling unable to accept who they are now, unable to love their bodies,
Wow,
unable to love their face, right?
That's a deep topic, which has been, again, brought about by COVID, the isolation and the staring at yourself on Zoom. I just want to mention that this conversation is not just for people over 50. It's for anyone who really wants to look at how are you living your life and how will it come to fruition later in your 50s, 60s, 70s. I do a lot of story coaching, which through the media work that I do, I help people form and shape, and I listen to a lot of stories through the interviewing that I do. And one of the things that I found throughout, and this specifically is around women all around the world, is they have had a very difficult time speaking their voice, having their voice heard. And when they do finally speak, they're often shuttered, shut down, made other people angry, so they don't speak up again. So not only are they terrified of having their voice, but they're terrified when their voice is heard of the reaction that they're going to get. And I mostly coach women, so I think this is where I'm hearing this the most. But if you are younger and maybe you're in your 20s or your teens or your 30s, it doesn't even matter. If you continually keep that pattern up, you're explaining what happens in your 60s and 70s, that you shut down that piece of yourself, or it comes out in rage, or you make decisions about yourself that are not real. It's fascinating.
So, we don't have a way to express everything that comes up for us. I mean, nobody has the opportunity to have a voice at every moment of every day. My suggestion is that we need to learn how to have our voice in the right moment. And that's true for men and women. So let's say that there was a woman I know, she was a client, who felt really silenced in her marriage. She felt muzzled. She felt that she couldn't express her needs and her dreams and fantasies of what she'd like because her husband would be critical. And so she stuffed her voice. And along with that is she stuffed her needs. She stuffed her dreams for her own life. She stuffed her own separateness from her husband, her independence from her husband and kids, right? And she kind of adapted. And what happened was in her 60s, she realized that she had really sacrificed her, as you said, her soul. She had sacrificed something very big that she wanted to begin to reclaim. And this is part of what I call emotional repair in late life. And there are a lot of practices in the book for doing emotional repair, spiritual repair, life review, and learning meditation. So we began to work on how she could begin to communicate, because she was like a kid. She had no tools for finding her voice. And she really was determined that she was going to begin to do this before she died. I mean, part of the context of late life is mortality awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And once
Yes.
you realize that there's a shortened time horizon, and that you don't want to die with regret, then there's a certain urgency about reclaiming some of these things from the shadow. And she was very anxious and scared about it. And we explained to her husband what was happening. And he agreed to try not to criticize her if she could communicate in a way that he didn't hear as criticism, because what was happening was he heard it that way. So she learned how to use I statements.
Mm-hmm.
She learned how to say, I need, or I want.
I feel.
Or I feel, that's right. And this woman at 65 really became liberated and was able to follow some of the dreams. Like she wanted to paint. And she was terrified of doing that. And she was able to actually pursue that dream in her 60s. And so I think that, part of reclaiming what's in the shadow at this stage of life can be scary, but it can be incredibly rewarding.
Yes, yes. It's very interesting. I mentioned to you earlier before the show about the filter dropping away at 50. And you just kind of explained why that is. And I don't know if anyone else has experienced this. If you've crossed the 50-year mark, all of a sudden you don't care what you're saying, or you are less concerned about what people think, and you just don't sugarcoat your words so much anymore. And you just explain why that happened or happens.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
I think there's a freedom to be authentic that comes with age. And it comes with sort of the dropping of the masks, because we don't have to be who other people want us to be anymore.
Yeah.
And in the, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, it's not about image. It's also not about achievement. It's not about the old roles. And this is what I mean by role to soul. It's not about the old roles and responsibilities that we carry in midlife when we're building our empires, raising families, and making financial security. And so what is it about then?
Right. That was going to be my question. What is it about?
That old spiritual question comes back, who am I?
Yes.
The perennial question, right? If I'm not the CEO, who am I?
Yes. If I'm not the wife, who am I? If I'm not the mother, who am I?
If I'm not the shadow expert, who am I? And so the book teaches a lot of practices to begin to shift our identity from those kind of fleeting, transient roles to a deeper spiritual essence. And whatever we call that, if we call it self or divine or spirit or essence, doesn't matter to me what we call it. I borrowed the phrase from Ram Dass, roll to soul. And I remembered when I was writing the book that he coined that phrase decades ago. And it stayed with me all these years.
I wouldn't say those roles are fleeting, though, Connie. I would say that they're wonderful roles in your life. The role of motherhood, the role of partnership, the role of you know career identity. Those roles aren't fleeting. They're you spend decades in those roles,
You
long
do.
times in those,
You
and
do.
sometimes they're wonderful experiences, and you don't want to leave them.
Yes.
And so I'm kind of wondering, you wrote an article about the fantasies of retirement. And I'd love you to share that a little bit with us. What are some of the fantasies of retirement?
And so whatever language you give to that, whatever you believe about that, it's kind of behind and beneath the roles. So I retired from my clinical practice. I'm no longer a therapist. So I wouldn't say I am a therapist anymore, right? So from this point of view now, 3 years later, it looks fleeting to me. It's past.
3 years later?
Yeah,
Really?
it's just past. I never think about it. And most people who are interviewed about their past careers say they've moved on. They don't think about them anymore. They don't still identify with them. Now, when it comes to, but they do identify with doing whatever they're doing now. And my point is that there's something else deeper than that, which we're not educated about. We're not, and people who don't have spiritual practices are not oriented that way. So in terms of retirement, it's such a profound transition just because of what we're talking about. Because letting go of these lifelong roles can be a huge and painful loss for people. Mm-hmm. And really bring up, the existential questions again. If I'm not that, whatever that is, then who am I? And what do I believe? And what are my values? And what are my priorities? And so we have this training in our culture around retirement to do financial planning and to do some emotional planning with the family. But we don't really think about the inner work of retirement. Nobody teaches us that. Nobody's taught me that when I was in my late 60s and ready to leave clinical practice. I couldn't find any counseling or guidance about it. Not really, not deeply. So I wrote this chapter, which is about how to uncover those shadow parts of us that are denying and resisting the idea of retirement. So just like we were talking about earlier, there's a part of us that wants to stay young and deny age. Yes. I call that the inner ageist. Yes. And this part that wants to deny retirement, I call that the doer or the driver. My clients came up with those names for those parts of themselves. Yes. So the doer is so identified with being productive and achieving and succeeding that it's unimaginable to live without that. Right. And so that part of us resists making this transition out of paid work. Mm-hmm. Retirement doesn't mean watching TV all day. Retirement means many things to many people, and it's very individual. So I'm not prescribing what people do in retirement. Mm-hmm. What I'm suggesting is there's a state of mind that we can cultivate so that as elders, we do what we do differently. It's not about more doing or less doing, or more volunteering or less volunteering. It's not about that. It's about the state of mind, or the level of consciousness that we cultivate as we do something as an elder. But if we're still caught up in a career, the heroic midlife empire building career, then we're not going to make that transition into the next developmental stage. It's waiting for us there.
Yes, that's so interesting. I was just having this conversation with my mom yesterday, who just turned 80, and she is still working at 80 because she wants to. She started working in in the 50s and 60s, and she worked all the way through us growing up. And she had even though my father worked as well, she always was able to make her own money and do her own thing. And at this phase in life, she still has one or two clients. She's an interior designer. And my father has passed. And I was asking her, and I had given her the book on the 5 stages of grieving by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And she read the book and she says, I don't get it. I mean, I'm going through these phases, but I don't know why I have to. Now, grieving and aging are 2 separate categories, but they come together in this whole idea that you're talking about around meaning and purpose in life. And this, the 6th stage by David Kessler came out about meaning and purpose. And I was trying to explain this to my mom, saying you have still this meaning in your life. You still have purpose in your work and what it is that you want to do. She said, but I don't want to do that forever. She's in that gap of doing to being.
Yes.
No clue on how to get to the being part. And she'll admit that, of course. I'm not saying anything she doesn't already know.
Yeah.
But,
well, there's millions of people. You asked me initially about numbers. There's 10,000 people a day turning 65. Wow. So there's millions of people in that moment where your mom is. And before that, 65 looking at retirement, 75 looking at retirement, 80 looking at retirement.
Yes.
I mean, she's kind of semi-retired with 1 or 2 clients, we could say.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the inner work, the practices, the tools that I'm offering people are not widely known about.
Let's talk about those. Let's please talk about how to shift and transition into a state of being.
Well, as I said a minute ago, it's not doing versus being. So it's not that we stop doing and then we just sit and do nothing or just meditate, because we're not in a monastic culture where, all of a sudden we're going to go wandering with our begging bowl. So, right? Yes. But there is a way in our culture to bring contemplative practice into our homes and families, because with the sort of democratization of all the practices in every tradition now, whether it's Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, it doesn't matter, or unaffiliated, there are practices available that will fit everyone. And it's really about, that's why I spend time in the book suggesting ways to find what's a fit for you, what resonates for you as a practice that will allow you to turn your attention within and quiet the mind and be still, even if it's just for a few minutes, and listen to that still small voice inside, and even receive some guidance from it. Mm-hmm. And I think what happens when people don't have that or make that time and have that practice, there's a lot of noise inside the mind. And it's confusing. It's very confusing. It can be overwhelming. People don't know what to listen to. Those are voices of shadows. And so the combination of shadow work, identifying those shadows about age or retirement, and then a sitting practice that helps you quiet your mind and observe your thoughts, that combination can allow us to move toward the shift that you and I are talking about. And for some people, meditation is just a launching pad to do more. It's not about not doing. So I've been sitting in meditation for more than 50 years, Lisa. And my life has not been passive or disengaged. And I use it with my writing to empty my mind before I write. I use it to become aware of my shadow issues in my activism and my service and my relationships. So you can weave it in, and whatever it is that resonates with you, if it's mindfulness or centering prayer or TM or chanting or Zen, it doesn't matter to me what it is, but a practice that really allows you to quiet your mind. It changes everything. It gives you a refuge from the noise, the terrible noisy environment that we live in now.
Yes, yes, yes. It gives you a break and a chance to listen to
Yes.
yourself. Now, you said that you do it maybe even if it's just for a few moments, but I read that you like to go through the transition from light to dark through this awareness practice. Tell us a little bit about that. I think that's so beautiful. And the seasons kind of dictate that, but it's interesting.
Well, I've been sitting for about an hour a day for 52 years at dusk.
Dusk.
So the loss in that is I miss the sunset. And so occasionally now I've started meditating earlier so that I can see the sunset, because I don't know, for some reason that's become important. But so, for me, that turn from light to dark, from daytime to evening time, is an in-between time. Like you were just saying, your mom is in this in-between time.
Right.
We call it liminal. The liminal space is the between space. And so dusk is a liminal space when it's no longer day, but it's not yet night. And that's the time that I've found for me that's easiest to sit and turn within. Other people find it in the morning when they first wake up, and it kind of calms them and prepares them for the day. It's very individual.
Now, what if you're more of a social person where you do like to, you thrive in social environments, you thrive by talking with people? Is that also, could you consider that a form of a meditation or a transition?
I'm trained in Jungian psychology. So this difference between introverts and extroverts is really important to me. And what that means is that extroverts get their juice, their energy from other people, from outside themselves. And introverts get it from inside, from going within. And those are different orientations to life. But they're not black and white. We all have both of those. I mean, I love being with my friends and I love meditating. We all have both of those. But there are people, I noticed this with all the interviews in my book. There are lots of people who are more drawn to meditation and others who are more drawn to social activities and service activities. Like there's a group called Elders Action Network, which is all about organizing elders around social justice causes, and it's fabulous. So, there are different orientations to life in this way, and there's no wrong, there's no right or wrong. There's just a sense of, see if you know this about yourself, then you can take advantage of that knowledge, where you get your joy, your juice, your inspiration, and you can go there.
I mean, I find it interesting because you are an author and you have, as you said, 78 years of experience. Is that what you said?
72. 72.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't
And
matter.
and you are in this phase of your life where you've come out with a new book. And it's a really wonderful offering, the inner work of age, where you're really helping people understand what the inner work of this process that we all go through is all about. You have enormous purpose, Connie. You have beautiful meaning in your life. Would you say personally, this is what keeps you happy? It keeps you fulfilled?
Well, I I do have a very privileged life, and I'm really aware of that. And I live with incredible gratitude every day. Um,
You
and
created
now,
this life, though. I mean, you
well,
created
now,
it.
I mean, now I have this gratitude that I'm leaving a legacy. And there's so many people who want to find a way to do that who, don't have
Yes.
the opportunity. So I'm very aware of that. Um, and and I'm in an extremely loving, happy marriage, which is also really meaningful. And I have grandkids. I didn't have children, but I have grandkids from my husband. So, but you know what, Lisa? That's not the deepest purpose for me. The deepest purpose is spiritual development, role to soul. And so my spiritual practices, which have, kind of been the context for my whole adult life, are really the most meaningful to me and really what I've been trying to transmit all my life. I mean, my first career was as a meditation teacher. So, I've really been trying to share the value of that. And for me, and this may not be true for everyone, but I am practicing this shift now from role to soul, practicing moving my identity from all the doing, even though I'm doing a lot, from all the doing to who I really am.
I love that. I had to ask. And you are in this beautiful process of leaving a legacy. And many are very curious about, I think even unconsciously curious about, how do I leave the legacy of my family story? And my mom, I hear her telling a lot of stories about her as a child and more than ever. And it's, her feeling that sense of turning 80 and my father passing and those experiences. And I'm hearing more and more and more stories that I've never heard before. And that's one way of doing it.
In the 50s, people thought that reminiscence was pathological. In the field of gerontology, they really thought that was like living in the past and try to bring them into the present. And then Robert Butler, this famous gerontologist, came along and he said, no, life review has a purpose. And it's a healthy way to digest one's life experience. People don't have an organized way to do it, so they do it in these kind of reverie states of nostalgia and piecemeal states of a story here and a story there. But then they organize a traditional life review and started to teach people how to do it. And what I've done is I've added the dimension of the shadow. So the life review is of the conscious life that we've lived. And when you add the dimension of the shadow, you begin to review the unlived life. All the stuff that was not expressed and not lived out and repressed into the shadow, as we were talking about earlier.
Yes.
So that's a chapter in the book for people who are interested in this process. And it's I'll tell you, I was shocked when I did it. I uncovered a lot of material that was really meaningful to me and saw patterns that I hadn't seen before, memories that I hadn't recalled. And also, I began to remember people I needed to forgive or receive forgiveness from. And so it led to a certain amount of emotional repair work for me, which has been really wonderful. So that's
That
another tool. And, your mom could learn how to do that in a more organized way. But the other thing I wanted to say is that people are making video memoirs now.
yes,
So,
yes,
people who can't write can just talk to the camera
yes.
or to the telephone and record their stories.
My husband's father has just a hobby of doing that, of interviewing people in their later life and asking about the stories of their life and putting it on video and cutting it into little movies. And it's just a hobby of his, and he absolutely loves doing it for
Nice.
friends and for other people. And it's part of his process as well as facing his own mortality and so forth. But my question for you is around those with illness in the later part of life where there is dementia or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's and issues that maybe you are like the person is experiencing or your loved one is experiencing. Is there something that you recommend on how to deal with that? How to embrace that?
Well, right now, our health span is starting to catch up to our lifespan. So that means that along with our extended longevity, we could have extended health and then die quickly rather than have a long decline. But that's not going to be true for everybody.
Mm.
Some people are going to get degenerative disease or already have it, and it's hard and it's painful to watch someone you love have it as well. So I do have a chapter about illness as spiritual practice and how do we relate to illness with inner work. And I tell a story, there are a bunch of stories in there about caregiving, but I tell a story about a friend of mine who I took care of for 2 years when she was dying of cancer. And all the sort of stuff that we got into in our relationship and how we worked it through and how we sort of eventually got beyond she was the patient and I was the caregiver, and we dropped our roles and we really saw each other as souls. And there was this incredible freedom in our relationship after that. It took some work, some effort, some awareness, but it was a beautiful experience for both of us. And, I miss her every day. And at the same time, I'm grateful for what I learned in being a caregiver with her. Her name was Linda.
What a beautiful
So,
process. Wow.
yeah, yeah. And there's also a story about another friend who died during my writing of the book, in the chapter about death, and the way that she chose to die. It was really, she modeled something so creative and precious and fearless. Once she got through the fear and the upset, I'm not saying she wasn't upset. It was a very shocking, sudden thing that happened. But she modeled something, so brave and unique. And so I write these stories in the book about how people can kind of reframe some of these experiences for their own, to increase their own awareness, expand their own development.
That does take a certain amount of expanded consciousness, especially if you've been in roles for your whole life, like husband, wife, and
Yeah,
you've all of a sudden switched to caregiver or mother, daughter, father,
exactly.
parent-child relationships. That's those are hard roles to redefine.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, but that does happen. It does happen where the child all of a sudden becomes the adult caregiver.
That's right.
Yeah.
Ramdas wrote a book called "Who Can I Help? How do I help?" or something, and he said in there, we start out asking, "How can I help?"
Mm.
and we end up asking, "How can you help me?" So there's something inevitable, about this transition, and from my point of view, because we don't have any guidance for it from anywhere else, I just really tried to create that guidance for people.
Well, the idea going from the role to the soul, if you could just tell us just a few more words about that, because that's the direction of the book. And you've mentioned it in a few stories and many different ways, but how would you encapsulate that? What does that mean to really go from the role to the soul? I got the picture and the image of what it felt like to have that different change in that relationship with your friend Linda. So, how do you do that?
Well, the practices in the book suggest how you can begin to turn your attention, your habitual self-talk, your habitual embodied sense of who you are, and begin like, I am a writer, or you are an interviewer, a radio host, or you are a wife, or I am a grandma. So there's all that habitual stuff that we identify with consciously and unconsciously. So how do we begin to shift that to a deeper identity?
Okay.
How do we begin to do that? So one of the ways is, one of my practices is, I am not that. I am that which breathes through everything. Ram Dass's was, I am loving awareness. That was his way of working with it. I am loving awareness. I like to say, I am not the doer. I'm not the wife. I'm not the writer. I am that which breathes through everything. And somebody else might practice, I'm not the mom. I am spirit. I am embodied spirit. Or I am a soul on a journey. And we sit with that and we begin to feel it sinking into our bodies and settling into our minds. And it's a practice. So it's a practice that is both letting go of the old roles and then taking in and taking on the new identity. And, meditation really helps because we can sit in that awareness in meditation where that is real. It's not just an idea.
That identity is real.
Yeah, for me, that identity is real when I meditate.
Yes. I love the starting off with I am not that.
Uh-huh.
That's freeing.
That's freeing.
Liberating.
It's disidentifying with what is. This is my method of shadow work as well. So I am not that shadow character. That's not who I am.
Oh, that's great.
And if I begin to recognize it as a part of me that I can observe and I can address it, if I can say out loud, I am not that shadow character. Hey, you, saboteur, I'm not you. Then it's not me. So if I can observe it and address it, then it's not who I am, right? And so that can be a good beginning for people to disidentify and then begin to bring in the deeper identity.
And that deeper identity you find through the meditation. And sometimes it's easier to find out what you're not than what you are. And in your state of meditation, can you tell me what you are?
Yeah, I am that. I mean, my tradition is Vedanta. So I'm not a Buddhist like everybody else these days. That's kind of the popular. And so if you're in the Buddhist tradition, you can say, I am Buddha nature. I am emptiness, shunyata.
Yes, I am nothingness.
I am shunyata, okay? But that's not my lineage. My lineage is Vedanta. And so Vedanta uses the language of the self. So I am that, I am the self. I am the God within, the divine within. I am pure awareness. I'm not awareness of objects. I am pure awareness or pure consciousness or a soul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just a soul. Wow, that is such a beautiful relationship to understand the relationship of the soul, just your soul, you as a soul.
Mm-hmm.
That
And the
can be
evolution,
explored.
the evolution of the soul.
The
Yeah.
evolution of it. Yes. Yes. Well, I have absolutely loved this conversation. And the techniques that you bring about in the inner work of age is really important. It's doing this inner work so that you really don't fall prey to some of the unconscious memes of ageism that we have that are
Yes.
so pervasive in our society.
So true.
Well, thank you so much to offering real practical solutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. The pleasure has been mine, and thanks for the presence you have been during the interview.
I've enjoyed it.
The book again is called The Inner Work of Age. Connie Zweig has been my guest, and you can look it up at theawareshow.com as well. Thank you so much, and until next time, I invite you to stay aware.